Brother Cates. He's always so gracious and a wonderful Christian man, and it's been a real pleasure of my life to work with him closely for the last little more than 17 years, though I knew him before then. I want to thank you also for coming. You know, we've had a wonderful attendance, and the weather hasn't seemingly hindered that much. Reminds me of a little boy whose mother was complaining about the weather. And the little boy spoke up and said, "Mother, don't judge the day by the weather." And there's a lot of truth to that. I have so many questions, I haven't been able to get to all of them. I'm going to try to do that at this hour. We've had a lot of discussion, and I haven't gotten as far as I would like to, but I'm going to try to get as far as I can. Can we worship the Lord without performing all 5 acts of worship? The example, when we come together tonight, we should not partake of the Lord's Supper. You know, there are some who do, but they don't have scriptural authority for it, do they? Should not partake of the Lord's Supper because it is not the first day of the week. We do, however, sing, pray, and study the Word. Well, you know, he's answered his own question, or she may not be smart enough for a woman. A man may have written this one. I don't know. But anyway, we have Bible example of different acts of worship being done apart from the assembly. But there are 2 of them that are never done apart from the assembly. That's giving, one of them. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye upon the first day of the week." Now it's limited to that. "Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in stores God had prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." The Lord's Supper was never taken except on the first day of the week. Acts 20 and 7, "And upon the first day of the week." And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow. You cannot take it scripturally any other time. And Paul makes clear that they did it when they came together. 1 Corinthians 11, 20. But there are 5 acts on the Lord's Day, and we can do anything but giving and the Lord's Supper at other times, as well as on the Lord's Day. Can a Christian declare bankruptcy with God's approval? Well, it depends. I have never read the bankruptcy law. Hope I never have to. But I've known of people who took bankruptcy, and then they lived a leisure life after that. And it wasn't honorable the way they handled it. But the bankruptcy law, if I understand it correctly, was passed for honest people who, in order to pay their debts later, have to declare bankruptcy so they can gradually pay their debts. And I've known of people who did that. So that would be honorable. But as in almost everything else, that which is honorable can be done, or something can be perverted so something dishonorably is done. Is instrumental music in worship to God a salvation issue? Of course it is. You know, I never heard that among members of the church until recent years. And they say, "Well, I don't believe instrumental music is a salvation issue." No, and I suppose they'd have in mind who didn't think strange fire was a salvation issue either. It is a salvation issue. You know, Paul said in Romans 15:4, "For whatsoever things are written aforetime are written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope." Now, I remember in the Old Testament that Ezekiel 22:26 says, "The priests have violated my law and have profaned my unholy things. They have put no difference between the holy and the profane." Now, since the Old Testament was written for our learning, I want to call attention to a couple of priests who did profane by bringing in unauthorized fire. Leviticus 10:1 and 2, and Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord. Now notice, which he commanded them not. It didn't say that they were told, thou shalt not get this fire from someplace other than the altar, but they were told where to get it. By the way, Leviticus 6:12, Leviticus 16:12, they were to get that fire from the altar. I don't know where they got it, but it was strange fire. It was unauthorized. What happened? And there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Now in the New Testament, we are told, for example, in Ephesians 5:19, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching, every woman in this audience that sang this today, when we've had singing out here, you were teaching somebody. It's amazing that people would make laws where God hasn't, and forbid a woman from teaching as long as she doesn't usurp authority over the man. I've been dealing with antis for more than 50 years. I've debated them. I've discussed with them in private. But they make laws where God has not made laws. They bind where God has not bound. Now what happens when people do that? 1 Timothy 4:1 through 3, Paul said, now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that means clearly or plainly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing doctrines and doctrines of devils. Now what are two identifying marks of that? Forbidding to marry. Number 2, commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving, of them that believe and know the truth. Anybody who binds where God is not bound either doesn't believe the truth, doesn't know the truth, or doesn't respect the truth. Now, if you do not want to marry, that's your business. I heard of a man who said to his wife, I would marry you again. She said, that's what you think. But the truth about it is it's a matter of judgment as long as you marry somebody that's eligible to marry. Marriage is honorable in all, the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God shall judge, Hebrews 13:4. Nobody has the right to forbid an eligible person from marrying if he or she wants to. Now then, if you want to eat meat, I once had an instructor that said he ate rattlesnake meat, and he had a terrible personality. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. But it wasn't sinful for him to eat that. I wouldn't want to eat it. I'd rather have a T-bone steak. I ate some tail of a crocodile, or maybe it's an alligator, one of those creatures. But I'd rather have chicken. But it was all right to eat either one of them. But now, what happens if we go beyond the doctrine of Christ? The doctrine of Christ says we're to sing, and in singing we speak to each other and we teach each other. 2 John 9 through 11, whosoever transgresseth, and if I transgressed, I would be going beyond this platform. And that's what I believe the American Standard says. Whosoever transgresseth and abideth not in the doctrine of Christ hath not God. He that abideth in the doctrine of Christ, he hath both the Father and the Son. If they're coming in to you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed, for he that bid him Godspeed is partaker of his evil deeds. Instrumental music is just as sinful today as the strange fire was in Nadab and Abihu's day. When a Christian church preacher and one of our brethren discussed this matter at Freed Hardeman, and some of you were there, I went to the microphone and I said to him, I didn't say I guess, I assumed he knew. I said, we both know what Leviticus 10:1 and 2 says, and I may have quoted it. But I said, I would like for you to show the difference in the strange fire that Nadab and Abihu used and the use of instrumental music in the worship of the church. He said, you have a good question. Well, I knew I had a good question. But I didn't ask him to critique my question. I asked him for an answer. He talked around and around and around and evaded. He never answered that. There is no difference. But here's another along that line. Is it wrong to sing church songs, that is psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, with instrumental music outside the assembly? Now, where did we ever get the idea that worshiping God is different out of the assembly, if we're singing, than it would be in the assembly? This building is not the church. When I grew up, brethren called it the meeting house, except they left off the G, meeting house they called it. But you know what Acts 7:49 says? Howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in houses made with hands. When we sing here tonight, we're worshiping God. We must worship Him in spirit and in truth, John 4:24. But if my wife and I go home and we sing, we're worshiping God just like we were worshiping God here. It's the same God. It's the same kind of worship. Now, some people say, oh, well, I don't think it's wrong to have instrumental music with a psalm, hymn, spiritual song. Well, where in the New Testament do you find authority for it? I'll tell you what, I've never seen a psalm, hymn, or spiritual song with instrumental music in the assembly, and I don't sing it outside the assembly. I believe it's unscriptural. All right, let's see. I have several more here, so I'll have to move right along. The New King James translation a good translation? And would you recommend it for use? Thank you. Well, I like the old King James better. And especially the American Standard of 1901. Those are the only two I use. Those are the only two we use here in school. And we've had one or two or three that didn't come here because we did that, but we still do that. They are reliable translations. Now, I think from what I haven't examined the New King James much, I think it has more positive points than negatives. But I still far prefer the American Standard, especially. But I tell you one thing, I don't have time to go in much detail, but let me just give you one thing I don't like about the New King James. I don't like you and your instead of thee and thou. Now, I remember that David said, and I'm not saying that's an absolute matter of salvation, but it jars on my ear. If we were to sing that, how great you are, I think it's far more appropriate and beautiful to sing how great thou art. I remember that David once said, thou thoughtest that I was altogether such an one as thyself. Psalm 50, the latter part of verse 21. God is, well, Psalm 89:7, God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints and to be had in reverence of all of them that are about Him. I believe that principle applies in all of our speech and should be in all of our translations. But I think it has more positive points than it does negative, but I still don't use a copy of it. I use the old King James in the American Standard. Then we've gotten a number of, I think this one's from Texas, we've gotten a number of emails this time. Brother Elkins, the word devotional is used a lot in the church these days. It seems to me a quote devotional is usually really a teaching from God's Word. Well, that's what I understand. So why do we not simply call it a Bible class, since that is what it really seems to be? I know it is used extensively in the denominational world. Since that is where I originally heard it, I don't think it a matter of fellowship. Well, I don't either. You can have your preference without on matters like that as long as the Bible's taught. I don't think it's a matter of fellowship, but it does seem like more of a denominational thing. What are your thoughts? Well, my thoughts are simply this. If the truth is taught, if it's called a devotional, or if it's called a Bible study, I believe it's the same thing. And then I think you could have your own preference along that line. Well, let's see. I have others. Why are congregations dismissing their services, especially on Sunday nights, and meeting in small, quote, cell groups? Well, I may not know all of the reasons why, but I think it's a mistake. First of all, in 1 Corinthians 14:23, if therefore the whole church be come together in one place. Now, we've, all through the years, we've met on Sunday, and in most places Sunday night. What if, and in an assembly, and we have to do that for the Lord's Supper. Now, what if somebody's traveling, and I've known of this happen. They are traveling, they try to get to a certain place because they understand their services at a certain time. I've known a situation when they arrived, the building was dark and the doors were locked. Brethren out here in little cell meetings. Now, granted, you could meet in private groups and the truth be taught, but I tell you one thing has often happened with some of those private groups. There's been a lot of error taught in them. And furthermore, when a cancer is there, you want to get rid of those cancer cells. I think you better just not start any. In there, you won't have as much temptation of getting cancer in those cells. I believe that it is an effort on the part of somebody. A lot of people don't realize they're doing this, I don't suppose. But sometimes I wonder if it's not an effort to get away from pulpit preaching. Preaching is to save the world, according to Paul. And the world calls it foolish. But Paul said in Romans 1:16, it is the power of God unto salvation. So, why not the church meet together? Then if you want to meet in smaller groups, and the elders want you to do that at some other time, if you're just determined and bound to do it, why, let them decide what they want to do. But I don't think it's wise to meet in those little cell groups. As I say, most of them become cancerous and ought to be cut out. Now, let me see if I've overlooked anything else. And the time just gets away. It used to be that Christmas came every 2 or 3 years, and now it comes every 3 or 4 months. Time really does get away. Here's something that I want to deal with for just a little. Brother Fred Bogle is here, and he doesn't mind telling his age. And if I looked as young as he, for my age, I probably would go around telling mine. He's almost 93, and I think he could pass for 73, 75. But he is involved in a fight to try to keep evolution out of the school textbooks in Florida. Brother Flagrant over here is a science teacher. They may want to get together. I talked with Brother Bowles, and I jotted down these notes. I wanted to make sure I got it as correct as possible, because we don't have time for him to get up and go into detail. The time has gotten away so rapidly. But here's what I got. And Brother Bogle, if I don't get this right, you can speak up and tell me. He says they had a hearing in Orange County, Florida, Orlando, where he lives, on this matter. But then there were those who bypassed that and went to the Florida Department of Education in Tallahassee. And the evolutionists wanted to put in I didn't write this part down, but I remember what it said. They wanted to put in the textbooks that evolution is a scientific fact. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:20, O Timothy, guard that which is committed unto thee, turning away from the profane babblings and oppositions of the knowledge which is falsely so called. Now, that's the American Standard. The King James says, which is science falsely so called. If there ever was a misnomer, it's to call evolution science. The word science means to know. All they have is a theory. But when they voted, when the Department of Education, I believe there were 7 on that board, he told me, when they voted, 4 of them voted that they would not put in the book that evolution is a scientific fact, but they all agreed that they would put in that evolution is a scientific theory. A theory is a guess. Well, he said, to use his words, that made this evolutionary lawyer mad or angry. And he said, I will bypass the state board, and I will go to the legislature, and I will get it passed there. Well, Brother Bogle has a book, and I believe he has a letter. You already have that letter written? Not yet, but he's writing a letter, and he's going to send the book to every legislator in Florida. And he says when that evolutionary lawyer gets there, he's going to be sitting on the steps. And he's going to try to speak before the Florida legislature. He doesn't know for sure whether he'll get to. Now, brethren, that's one of the most erroneous and contemptible and far-out doctrine taught in our nation. And they start with kindergarten with it. And we better be speaking up, or we could conceivably become a nation that believes more in evolution than in God and in Christ. Let me see if there's anything else. Well, I think that this is about all of it. But he wants us to pray for him. Now, you know what? That's one thing that we not only could do. I told him that's one thing I'm going to do. And if there's anything I could do, I can't go down there and speak before the legislature. But if he got me an invitation, I would go. And I know some of you would go as well. So we really need to pray that the truth will prevail here. He's going to get that letter and tape out before this comes up in the state legislature. You never know. The word of the Lord doesn't return void. You never know how much good will be done from this. Brother Bogle, will you raise your hand or stand where you are? So just stand, if you will, and let people see you. Don't you think he could pass for 75? You know what? He had a hip replacement recently, and I asked him to lead the prayer the day he arrived and said, you know, if he needed help, I would help him up. Well, he walked up here like there's nothing to it. So I think he'll go up there and do a good job. So let's pray for him. Our time is gone. As far as I know, now I may have misplaced the question. Oh, I remember one that I don't have here, but I remember it. It was, if a man's wife dies, must he resign? Now, you cannot become an elder without having one wife. 1 Timothy 3:2 and Titus 1:6. But suppose he is married and they have 2 children, we'll say 2 teenage children, who are members of the church, and he has them under control. For if a man know not how to care for his own house, how then shall he take care of the church of God? And he has a good wife. Well, suppose those children are out one afternoon, on Sunday afternoon, and both of them are killed. Would he have to resign? There may be some who would say he would, but I've never talked with anybody who said they would. He doesn't lose his qualification of teaching and example and all of that. I haven't met anybody who said they thought children getting killed would cause him to have to resign. Well, if his wife dies, now he had to have one wife to become an elder. But if his wife dies, and if he's in a community where somebody's trying to bring in instrumental music, and the brethren want him to stay on during that time, I personally would not make a big problem over it. But if there is a problem, and brethren did not think that's proper, I would resign if I were in that position. Brother McGarvey said, if my wife were to die on Friday, I would resign the next Sunday. But you know, you have to make up your own mind along that line. Maybe I have time to say one other thing. On this matter of instrumental music, I think I mentioned this last year. This tract had just been reprinted. I hold here in my hand a tract called The Way of Unity between, quote, the Christian Church and the Churches of Christ by Brother H.C.O. Bowles. Brother Bowles was a great man. He was editor of the Advocate at one time, president of David Lipscomb College, now University. He was the great-grandson of Raccoon John Smith. He was invited, I believe it was May the 3rd, 1939, to Indianapolis, Indiana, where the Christian Church had what they called a unity meeting, and Brother Bowles was invited to address that meeting on this matter of instrumental music and our differences. I tell you, brethren, this is one of the most remarkable addresses I've ever read. I have plenty of these over there in the display area. I wish congregations would take 100 of them, or whatever number you want to take back home with you. Now, whatever comes from it, I don't use any of it for myself personally. I put it back into a fund to preach more tracts. And I've requested my wife and children that when I'm dead, that if possible, they will continue to do this. We have mailed these tracts from Minnesota to California, from Florida to Michigan, but I'd like to see them more widely dispersed. I hope you'll go over there and check on that and take some of them with you. Our time is up, so Brother Keats, if you will conclude services.